The mirror in the attic. There was a house on Maple Street that everyone in town avoided. It stood tall and crooked, with peeling paint and windows that seemed always dark, as if the shadows inside were too thick to let the light through. Its garden was overgrown with weeds that twisted around the iron fence, reaching out like clawed hands. For years the house had been empty, though every so often, neighbors swore they saw lights flicker in the windows or heard soft whispers on the wind. The bravest kids would sometimes dare each other to go inside, but few ever did, and none stayed long enough to explore the whole house. No one was more curious about the house than 12-year-old Liam. He'd always been drawn to mysteries and spooky tales, and he couldn't resist the challenge his friends gave him on a gray, rainy afternoon just before Halloween. "I bet you won't go all the way to the attic," one of them teased. "Bet you won't even last 5 minutes in there." Grinning, Liam took the dare. Armed with a flashlight, he slipped through the rusted gate, its hinges groaning in protest, and made his way up the creaky steps to the front door, which had been left slightly ajar. He pushed it open, and the thick, musty smell of the old house hit him, mingling with the faint scent of metal and something else, something that smelled faintly like smoke. The first floor was dim, the light barely filtering through the heavy curtains. His flashlight illuminated dust motes swirling in the stale air. The house was silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards underfoot and the muffled sound of rain tapping against the windows. Room by room he moved through the house, finding each one as empty as the last, save for a few pieces of old furniture covered in dust. He was starting to think the house wasn't all that scary after all. Then he reached the staircase to the attic. Liam hesitated. He remembered the stories he'd heard, the ones that warned of a cursed mirror hidden up there. A mirror that didn't reflect the world as it was but as something twisted and wrong. It was said that anyone who looked into it would see something strange, something that would follow them home, lingering in every mirror they passed. With a deep breath, he forced himself to climb the narrow stairs, each step groaning loudly in the silence. The attic door was slightly open, just enough for him to push it with one hand. The room was dark and cold, colder than the rest of the house, and the air was heavy, as if it were holding its breath. The only thing in the attic was a tall mirror, standing against the far wall and covered in a thick, tattered sheet. The frame was ornate, carved with twisting vines and strange faces, their eyes wide and hollow, watching him from every angle. Liam's flashlight cast shadows that seemed to make the faces shift and contort, giving them an eerie, lifelike quality. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the edge of the sheet. Part of him wanted to turn and run, to tell his friends he'd gone all the way up but not to stay a second longer. But his curiosity got the better of him. Slowly he pulled the sheet away. The mirror was old, its glass slightly cloudy, and it didn't quite reflect the room as it should. In the dim light, he could make out his own face, but it looked wrong. His eyes seemed darker, as if they held shadows within them, and his mouth was twisted into a faint smile, a smile he wasn't making. A chill ran down his spine. He took a step back, but his reflection stayed where it was, staring at him with that strange, unsettling smile. He lifted his hand, hoping his reflection would mirror him and break the illusion, but it didn't move. Instead, it began to lean forward, its hand pressing against the inside of the glass. Heart pounding, Liam stumbled back, almost tripping over his own feet. He couldn't tear his eyes away as his reflection reached out, its hand pushing against the glass, causing it to ripple like water. A low whisper echoed in the attic, soft yet menacing, like the voice of something that had waited far too long to be heard. "Come closer, Liam," the reflection beckoned, its voice so soft it was barely audible. "I want to show you something." Liam felt his feet move forward, as if drawn by an invisible force. He tried to resist, but his legs felt heavy, almost as if they weren't his own anymore. He was just inches from the glass, close enough to see every detail of his reflection's face. His hollow eyes, the eerie smile, the way his skin seemed paler than it should have been. The reflection reached out again, and this time its hand passed through the glass, gripping his wrist with a cold, bony hand. Liam gasped, pulling back, but the reflection's grip was unbreakable. The whisper grew louder, filling his ears, drowning out his own thoughts. "Stay with me forever," it hissed, its smile widening until it stretched across its entire face, distorting it into something monstrous. Liam fought with all his strength, but the reflection's grip tightened, pulling him closer to the glass. He could feel the coldness seeping into his skin, spreading through his arm and into his chest. He looked around, desperate for anything that could help him break free, but the attic was empty, silent, and suffocating. Just as he felt himself slipping, a loud crash echoed through the attic. The sheet he had pulled off the mirror had fallen onto the floor behind him, stirring up dust and breaking the mirror's hold for just a moment. Summoning every ounce of strength, he wrenched his arm free and stumbled backward, his heart racing as he scrambled down the attic stairs, nearly tumbling in his haste. He didn't stop running until he was out of the house, the front door slamming shut behind him. He collapsed on the steps, gasping for breath, his wrist tingling with cold where the reflection had grabbed him. Slowly, he looked down and saw a faint dark bruise forming in the shape of a handprint. From that day on, Liam never returned to the house on Maple Street. He tried to forget what he'd seen, but every time he passed a mirror, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him from the other side, waiting patiently for him to come back. Sometimes when he looked at his reflection, he thought he saw a flicker of that eerie smile, the faintest trace of that whispered promise. And every Halloween, when the rain began to fall and the shadows grew long, he'd feel the icy grip on his wrist once again, a chilling reminder that the mirror, and the thing inside it, had not forgotten him.